Good morning, Little Masters, and welcome back to today's Tolkien Times. I'm the Man of the West, also from the Prancing Pony podcast. As we take a break from our First Stage Poetry on Fridays this series, I've really enjoyed including poetry here on Thursdays as I read through and discuss the poetry, or some of the poetry, in The Lord of the Rings. Now, this series we've looked at a lot so far. We've looked at the mini versions of The Road Goes Ever On. We've looked at the other walking song, the hymn to Elbereth, 3 fun Hobbit tunes, the Barrow-wights' incantation, and Frodo's rendition of the Man in the Moon. Today, I want to look at the Riddle of Strider and the Fall of Gil-galad. Now, let's start with Strider. For that, we're going to go to his eponymous chapter, chapter 10 in Book 1 of The Lord of the Rings, where Butterbur dropped off a letter from Gandalf. Near the end of the letter, Gandalf says, "You may meet a friend of mine on the road, a man, lean, dark, tall, by some called Strider. He knows our business and will help you." Only in the post-postscript does Gandalf provide the riddle/prophecy of Strider. All that is gold does not glitter. Not all those who wander are lost. The old that is strong does not wither. Deep roots are not reached by the frost. From the ashes a fire shall be woken. A light from the shadows shall spring. Renewed shall be blade that was broken. The crownless again shall be king. Now, that first line, it's just a reversal of the traditional proverb, all that glitters is not gold. But what about that phrase? You'll often hear Shakespeare as the source of it, and it is perhaps the most well-known source. In 1596, the Merchant of Venice had the line, "All that glisters is not gold," though you'll see it in modern translations as glitters. Not surprisingly, though, the concept of shiny things not always being valuable goes back much further than that. We have Chaucer in 1380 saying that "it is not all gold that glareth," and a 12th century French theologian, Alain de Lille, writing, "Do not hold everything gold that shines like gold." Hammond and Skull point out another Chaucer quote from Canterbury Tales, "But all thing which that shineth is the gold, nis not gold, as that I have heard told." Of course, the meaning of that proverb is fairly clear. The attractive thing is not always as valuable as it may first appear to be. And that is what makes Tolkien's reversal of the proverb sheer brilliance. Here, the proverb means that the unattractive thing may, in fact, be highly valuable. The thing that does not glitter may, in fact, be gold. What a great verse as applied to Strider at this moment. Now, the second line, it's probably the most quoted out of context, actually probably the most misquoted as "not all who wander are lost." Fortunately, Aragorn quotes them correctly in a few paragraphs, helping to convince Frodo that he is the real Strider indeed. The third and fourth lines are references to his lineage, but you get a really big shift to the second 4 lines. It turns from a riddle about his identity into a prophecy about his future. And the last 2 lines in particular, referencing the shards of Narsil, which will indeed be reforged to create Anduril, the flame of the west, from the ashes of fire shall be woken. Now, we have enough time left to take a quick look at a song sung by a very unexpected voice. Strider and the hobbits are on a path heading south along the ridge of the Weather Hills toward Weathertop. Aragorn explains that long before, in the first days of the North Kingdom, they built a great watchtower on Weathertop, a Monsul, they called it. It was burned and broken, and nothing remains of it now but a tumbled ring, like a rough crown on the old hill's head. Yet once it was tall and fair. It is told that Elendil stood there, watching for the coming of Gil-galad out of the west in the days of the last alliance. Well, that, of course, prompted Merry to ask who Gil-galad was, and as Strider was lost in thought, we read, "Suddenly a low voice murmured, 'Gil-galad was an elven king, of him the harpers sadly sing, the last whose realm was fair and free between the mountains and the sea. His sword was long, his lance was keen, his shining helm afar was seen. The countless stars of heaven's field were mirrored in his silver shield. But long ago he rode away, and where he dwelleth none can say, for into darkness fell his star, in Mordor where the shadows are.'" The others turned in amazement, for the voice was Sam's. Now, we looked a bit at this poem, specifically the second stanza, in Week 50's Word Nerd Wednesday when we looked at Gil-galad himself. But as to how Sam learned it, he explains that Bilbo taught it to him when he was young because he knew how much Sam enjoyed hearing about elves. And while Sam claims Bilbo wrote what I have just said, Aragorn gently corrects him. "He did not make it up," said Strider. It is part of the lay that is called the Fall of Gil-galad, which is in an ancient tongue. Bilbo must have translated it. And though Aragorn tells us it's in an ancient tongue, that is unfortunately all we know about it. This is one of the verses we don't have more on, no earlier version, and not even the knowledge of whether the ancient tongue is Sindarin or Quenya. And I'm sorry to disappoint. Folks, thank you for joining me for this week's Third Age Thursday. Now I feel like an episode of the Grand Tour, and on that disappointment, so please join me next week as we continue looking at the poetry in The Lord of the Rings for the last 2 weeks of Series 7 with an in-depth look at the Song of Beren and Luthien, tying us in perfectly with our First Age Friday runs. Check out patreon.com/Tolkien Times to learn how you can support the show, get an ad-free feed, join my content council, get a bonus weekly episode, stop me from making more Top Gear and Grand Tour references, and more. And join me again tomorrow on today's Tolkien Times as we welcome back somebody that you'll enjoy on Fandom Fridays. If you're watching this on YouTube, please like and subscribe. Please follow or subscribe in your podcast apps and follow @Tolkien Times on all your social media. Finally, as Faramir says, go with the goodwill of all good men.